it's our community, and the door's open. So come on in. Meet Lisa Browar. Lisa Browar is president of Linda Hall Library, and she is here to talk about the centennial of the Panama Canal. And you say, well, what does one have to do with the other? And I could tell you that Linda Hall Library, and I'll say it for you, is one of the most beautiful libraries that I've ever been in. And I particularly like, what do you call the big malachite stand? It's a stand with a bowl. It's huge.
Well, in Italian, it's pronounced tazza, but locally we call it the tazza, and tazza means cup. It's Italian for cup, and it is thought to be the single largest piece of malachite in existence. It is
It's gorgeous,
one
and
solid
it's
piece
bright
of malachite.
green. We have a picture of it someplace here, and it's bright green. It sits right in the well, you see it as you walk in.
Yes, it's in the middle of the main reading room, and it was given to the library as a gift by Mrs. Helen Forsman Spencer.
She did so many wonderful things.
She did. She was a wonderful woman. She acquired it from an antiques dealer who acquired it from a collector named August Heckscher, who received it as a gift from Tsar Nicholas II.
Oh, well, it's gorgeous. But would I be correct if I said that Linda Hall Library is one of the 3 finest science libraries in the world?
Yes, you would be. Absolutely correct.
Yeah. And people from all over the world use it.
That's very true, and in fact we are arguably better known elsewhere in the world than we are in Kansas City.
Well, I must say that if people know about it, they think it's part of the University of Missouri at Kansas City because it sits on the university surrounds it.
Exactly.
And they think it, but it's a private library.
It is we like to say we're an independent library. We are privately funded but open to the public. And it's not uncommon for people who have lived here all their lives to believe beyond any reasonable doubt that we're part of the university. And I've even had people say to me, "Are you sure?" When I say we're not.
Are you sure? Well, that's wonderful, yeah. Yeah.
So, no, we exist in the midst of the campus, and while we have no organizational relationship to the university, we're good neighbors. They to us and we to them.
Yeah, that's important. But they have the most wonderful books. I was there not too long ago, and they had I saw a 15th century herbarium. And the pictures, interestingly enough, were drawn by a woman.
That's right.
And that, of course, was unheard of as well. She traveled to the jungle places somewhere. I forgot where it was. Do you remember?
I believe it was South America.
Yeah, someplace, but I've forgotten where it was. And drew these pictures of these plants from life. I mean, they're absolutely gorgeous.
Yes.
And is it Copernicus? You have a...
We have one of very few copies of Galileo's Sidereus Nuncius, which is Latin for starry messenger, when he announced his theory of the universe. And that, you know, the Earth was not the center of the universe or the center of the solar system. Quite controversial, and of course Galileo paid a very high price for that.
Yes, for his intellectual independence.
That's right.
Yes.
And there are very few copies left in the world today, and ours is interesting because it is thought to have been one that was actually owned by Galileo. There's marginalia. Notes written in the margin in a hand that is very, very similar to Galileo's. So it may have been, you know, frequently when books are published, the author gets a few copies. Same in Galileo's day, and we think that our copy may have been one of the copies that the printer gave to Galileo.
And that it goes from 15th century and Galileo, plus Galileo, to present day, and the most current magazines, articles, research that's being done in scientific subjects. I have a neighbor that's there with quite often. He's a structural engineer.
Well, and that would stand to reason. I mean, anybody who needs to find building codes or joint fittings or anything having to do with construction and engineering, we have it.
So it would be fair to say that if you are a scientist of one kind or another, Linda Hall has something for everyone.
Absolutely.
Go and visit. But I think that I'm going to encourage further visits because you have an exhibit coming up, and it is the 100th anniversary of the Panama Canal.
That's right.
And I would like to read to you what David McCullough said about the Panama Canal. He wrote a book about it. And he said, the creation of the Panama Canal was far more than a vast, unprecedented feat of engineering. It was a profoundly important historic event and a sweeping human drama, not unlike that of war. And I think that's kind of interesting too. Apart from wars, it represented the largest, most costly single effort ever before mounted anywhere on Earth. Now that is a strong statement.
Yes, it is.
And it held the world's attention over a span of 40 years. It affected the lives of tens of thousands of people at every level of society and of virtually every race and nationality. Great reputations were made and destroyed. For numbers of men and women, it was the adventure of a lifetime. Isn't that wonderful?
It is, and it's so descriptive.
And of course, the United States was not the first country to tackle the canal.
That's right. The French tried for many years, tried valiantly. The man who was responsible for building the Suez Canal, Ferdinand de Lesseps, was put in charge of the effort. And unfortunately, the engineering techniques that succeeded in the Suez failed in Panama because of the difference in the heights on one side of the canal and the other. And landslide after landslide just kept undoing all the excavation and the dredging, not to mention the loss of life due to disease, and finally the French just gave up.
Well, and all told, you say 42,000 workers dredged, blasted, and excavated the path from Cologne to Balboa.
That's right.
Boy, that's a lot of people, and a lot of them died.
A lot of them died. It's estimated that about 5,600 people died either from injury or disease. Yellow fever, malaria, typhoid, wiped out workers, families. It was really, as much as this was a triumph, it was also human tragedy on a grand scale.
Oh, it was, and people, well, you know, and it isn't very long. The canal
No,
isn't
it
all
isn't.
that long. What is it, 40, 78 miles?
Something like that.
Yeah, but it's a long way if you got to dig the trench.
Yes, and especially if you have to keep redigging them
Yeah.
as they
Yeah.
fill in.
Yeah, and yellow fever was a big,
Yes,
big
it was.
thing. And of course, everybody said it can't be done. And I found a little poem that I thought was fun. Well, if it can be thought, it can be done. A problem can be overcome.
That's
and
right.
I think it's a little poem, but I think it's important because it was overcome, and it was 48 miles. 48 miles. When the United States became involved, they put out what we know as an RFP for engineers.
Right.
And Mr. Nichols and Mr. Troutwine were the engineers that were chosen. They don't look like they've been digging in the dirt for a long time because they look very, very, you know, they're just two very nice gentlemen. And the collection that you're going to show is the A.B. Nichols collection, is it not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. A.B. Nichols was, if you want me to tell
Yes,
the brief
please,
version of the
yes.
story, A.B. Nichols was a civil engineer, born and educated in New England.
And he's the person that
He's the gentleman on the left. And they're dressed rather formally. They're not in their work clothes. During his years on the Canal Project, and he was one of the few Americans to arrive at the beginning of the American project and stay through the completion in 1914, during those years, those 14 years, he amassed a very impressive archive of not only his personal journals and diaries, but office memoranda and topographical maps and blueprints and technical specifications and photographs, menus, ephemera, just everything that he could put his hands on having to do with life in the canal zone during those years. And it has enabled us to tell the story not only from the perspective of the construction and engineering history, but the social history of the canal as well.
Well, and you know, you say, well, it was a challenge to dig the trench. That's only one of the challenges. The challenges were also economic. I mean, this was a big, expensive hole to dig. Why did they want to do this? What was it? What was it? I mean, you know, the Isthmus of Panama existed.
Of course, and there was transportation from one side to the other, but having an ability to connect the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean to allow ships to pass through cut many weeks off the trip that it would take, say, a ship leaving New York bound for San Francisco would have to go down the coast of the United States, through the Caribbean, around the tip of South America and up again.
And that was a very dangerous spot.
It was treacherous depending upon the time of year, especially. Being able to cut through the Isthmus of Panama cut weeks off of that trip, and whether it was for passengers or for goods going to or coming from market, it revolutionized international travel and commerce.
Because, you know, it is interesting because the Isthmus of Panama was known since the 16th century.
Yes.
But it couldn't accommodate very large ships. I mean, you could row your way across,
you could.
I suppose. You know, that's not a very good thing to do. But the challenges were economic, sociologic, logistical, and epidemiological. I mean, the yellow fever was it killed, I mean, people just fell over.
Yeah. Well, you know, some stunning things came to light as a result of this project, and that is the cause of yellow fever and malaria. You know, doctors were able to pinpoint a certain kind of mosquito as the culprit, but while they were doing that, they still didn't know exactly how to deal with treating the disease, and in order to cool patients down in the hospital, they would elevate the hospital beds and put the 4 legs of each bed in a little tin can of water. Really? And, you know, blow fans over, thinking that that would keep the patients cool.
Well, they assumed that the mosquitoes crawled up the bed?
No. They, at that point, they hadn't discovered the fact that mosquitoes were causing the disease.
Oh, I see.
And what they were doing was actually breeding
in that water.
More mosquitoes in that. But, you know, at a certain point, doctors were able to link the disease to mosquitoes and the fact that they were the carriers of the disease. And as a result, mosquito netting came into use, which was a major revolutionary
It saved a lot of lives.
Event, right.
But, you know, the railroads also played a role in this because the Panama Railroad crossed the isthmus.
Right.
So that was in, what, the 1850s?
Yes, yes. And railroads actually played a big part in the construction because railroads brought from North America people, supplies, gold, food, building materials, equipment, and that railroads were the most efficient means of transporting all of this to the canal zone. If people and everything having to do with building the canal had to be brought down by ship, it would have been more time consuming, more costly.
Oh, yeah.
So railroads were integral to building the canal.
Well, you know, I think it's interesting because I guess because my mind doesn't really work this way, but the engineers, Mr. Troutwine and Mr. Nichols, decided, because you mentioned the fact that the land wasn't level, so you couldn't just row across without falling off the edge. That was not good either.
No.
So they designed a series of locks.
Right.
To raise the water, and raise the water. And we have a photograph from 1912 of the construction of one of the locks. And I just think I mean, look at the size of that thing.
Well, I know. That is the Gatun lock under construction, and you can see a man in the foreground lying on a girder across the river, but we have some other photographs in the exhibition that actually show people alongside, you know, standing alongside the wall of the lock, and that is what really gives it scale.
We have another picture of this lock that shows the size where it's constructing the sidewall.
Yes,
there it is.
There it is. And you can see people in the foreground, what looks like the top of a staircase, and they look minuscule compared to the construction site they're on. And these are the kinds of photographs in the exhibition that really give it scale and scope and majesty.
Life, really, yeah. Oh, it does.
Yeah.
Because I have some friends who have taken, the first friend I had that said they were going to take a trip through the Panama Canal, I thought, really? But everybody that I've ever known that's taken that trip has been absolutely effusive about what a fine trip it was.
It's fascinating. I myself have never taken the trip, but just this morning I was speaking with somebody and she reminded me that the ships that can go through now in the present locks go through with maybe a foot or two on either side.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the reason why a larger lock is being built. right
well,
now.
it's scheduled for completion in 2015, I think.
I think they're a little bit behind
Are they?
schedule. There have been some labor union difficulties, and once those are ironed out, they can reposition the schedule.
Well, how will it change the global economy? And you might discuss just a little bit how the Panama Canal did change the global economy.
Well, as I said before, it shortened the time that it would take to transport goods from one side of the world to another. And with the size of the ships that can pass through, the size that can pass through right now are called Panamax.
Right.
Huge container ships that I think probably would dwarf an ocean liner. And the ones that will be able to pass through the enlarged lock are called post-Panamax.
Really? That's
And
funny.
my brain isn't large enough to even conceive of what those ships might look like.
Well, I think that would be fair to say that as far as the economy goes, I mean, you can transport goods with an economy of transportation because you don't need trucks. You know, you
Right.
can load it in New York and unload it wherever you're going as you go through the lock. So prices of goods is part of the global economy that's affected as well.
Absolutely.
And jobs, created a lot of jobs.
Absolutely. And, you know, for goods that maybe don't have to go from coast to coast through the Panama Canal, Kansas City has become a very important hub for the transportation of goods that may have come up from the Panama Canal from somewhere else to elsewhere in North America via rail or truck.
Yeah.
And we've become a very important center. In fact, the Panama Railroad is operated by Kansas City Southern Railroad,
Yeah, isn't that
which we found out as a result of doing this project.
Yeah. Well, I read it in something I read, but I also read that it shortened the trip by 8,000 miles.
Yes.
I mean that's a lot of
Significant.
miles. A
It's
lot
weeks.
of time.
It's weeks.
I mean, think about loading a ship
Yes.
and shortening it 8,000 miles. You need less food. You can
right.
carry more cargo because you don't have to carry so much food. You can, I don't know, I would guess that you could do it with fewer people, you know, crew. I don't know.
I don't know about
But
that.
all of those things come into play. When you shorten the trip by 8,000 miles, that's a lot
It's
of miles.
significant.
It really is.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the United States got involved in the canal when Mr. Troutwine and Mr. Nichols became the engineers, but we were not always involved. As you said,
That's right.
de Lesseps was involved, and the canal area did not belong to France or to the United
No.
States.
No.
Talk about that a little bit.
Well, at first, I have been told that originally the canal was supposed to go through Nicaragua. And the presence of a volcano where the canal was going to be dug was a big deterrent to not building it there.
I guess that might be.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the next most advantageous place was where it's currently located now across the isthmus, which is actually north-south, not east and west. And the United States did control the area until the handover, which I believe was in 1999.
Something like that.
Something like that. So I've got all these facts rattling around my head. And now it's controlled by the Panamanian government.
But the control by the United States was not all that popular when
No.
it happened.
It wasn't. It
But,
wasn't.
Yeah. But you know, it generated a lot of interest. And this funny little train they call the French Deauville train, Theodore Roosevelt took himself down to the canal
There it
to
is.
take a look. And look how these people are dressed. I mean, it's hotter than you know what down there.
Well, and they're immaculate.
And they're immaculate. But see their white clothes,
Yes.
and they look like they're dressed for a garden party. But I think it's funny because the interest it generated was, I think it was, I'm not sure that it would generate that much interest today.
No, I don't think so, because, you know, it's a matter of scale. We're living in a society that's already seen men walk on the moon.
That's right.
And, you know, people go to the deepest depths of the ocean possible without being crushed. And I think our whole concept of what is a stupendous feat has really changed.
Yeah. I think it was in the Carter administration that the canal was handed over, I believe.
I think that's when the agreement was forged, and the actual handover I don't think took place until the Clinton administration.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
because 99 was when it was.
That's right.
Yeah.
Carter was the president who agreed to give it back.
Yeah. And I think that there was a Panama Canal Commission too in there someplace in the 70s to the late 90s, was there not?
Yes, and in fact the gentleman who was the executive director, Alberto Alemán Zubieta, spoke at the library and talked about it, and he was the administrator of the Canal Authority during its first few years of existence as an independent entity.
I thought it was interesting that it takes, because I really didn't know, this caused me to read a lot, you know, about things I didn't know about, but it takes about 15 hours to go through the canal.
It does. You know, the water levels have to rise and fall, and the ships move through. Actually, they don't power themselves through. They're attached to what are called electronic mules. So if you remember
they hook onto the
they hook onto these electronic mules. The ships do, yeah. And that moves the ships through the canal. It's very much like the old mules who used to, like the Erie Canal.
They used to,
used to pull the barges through. Same principle.
I think that's kind of interesting. I noticed that it's going to cost at least $5.2 billion to do the redo on the canal, and I'm sure that it'll cost more than that
I'm
by the
sure
time
it will cost
it's
more than
finished.
that.
Well, it has to be economically viable to do it. I suppose it is. I mean, you know, it has to be. I
would imagine so, and I've also been told recently that Nicaragua is thinking about building their own canal, presumably not near a volcano. But if they do succeed, it would take many years for them to complete it, but that would be interesting to see what effect it has, not only on international trade and travel, but
I would have to
what it
wonder
would mean for the Panama Canal.
if it's worth the money, since we are, I don't know.
I don't know.
I'm not that good, so I can't I can't do that. But I know that the American Experience did a really interesting program. It's if you haven't seen it, I'm sure that it's archived somewhere. But if not, KCPT could tell you, because they played it.
They could. Unfortunately, their broadcast license has expired.
Oh, has it? So we can't see it?
They can't broadcast it anymore.
Oh.
However, it may still be available on one PBS website or another. But the reason KCPT showed it in earlier this year in the public library.
In 2011, I think.
Well, they broadcast it in 2011, and then they had a public viewing of it in the public library, Kansas City Public Library, before their license expired.
Oh.
So they can't broadcast it again.
I remember that, yes. Yeah. But it was just a magnificent...
it was beautifully done.
Oh, it was.
Beautifully done.
It was. You know, I guess I'm just fascinated with the photographs that you have in the exhibit. You have one of a dirt spreader at work. Now remember, this is in 1910.
Yeah.
And if you look at that dirt spreader, you see it runs on rail tracks.
Yes.
Now, somebody with the sweat of their brow and the ache in their back had to lay those tracks for that spreader to go. And let's talk about some of the different ethnic groups that worked on the canal. Could we talk about that as well?
Yes. Well, you know, I think life in the Canal Zone was very similar to life in the United States of America, and we sought to replicate American life in the Canal Zone in all of its aspects, both good and bad, and it was a very stratified society. The workers were categorized into gold workers and silver workers.
Really?
And the gold workers were considered the more valuable workers.
Really?
And they
because
were
of what
paid
they
more.
did?
What they did, and also
where they came
according to their ethnic background.
from?
It's, you know, it's one of these shameful things. It's a shameful moment in our history, but there it is.
See, I didn't know that. That's
yes, and the bee workers were paid less. They did more menial work. They had not such good living conditions. So it was one of these more embarrassing episodes.
Well, another problem that occurred is when they got the ditch dug, then the water rushed in.
Yes.
So they had to have a dredge to keep, because they had, you know, this was muddy, swampy business, not so wonderful. I wouldn't have applied for the job if I could have helped it. But the water rushed in, so they had to keep dredging that channel out. And the dredge looks to me like, and that's another photograph in your collection, but the dredge looks like an old riverboat kind of that the Corps of Engineers uses to this day, which I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah, probably is very similar to modern equipment. I don't know that there are too many ways to refine dredging techniques.
I doubt there are.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's kind of interesting too, because some of the equipment that was used then is still pretty much
still in
used
use.
now.
Yes.
I thought that you might like to see a map of how the canal, there it goes.
There it is.
And that's the route of the completed canal.
Yes, and that is a map that came to us from the A.B. Nichols Collection, so it is of the period. It has been beautifully restored. When we got the Nichols Collection, it was in very bad shape. Maps had been folded for many decades and had become brittle and could not be unfolded, and we had to have the entire collection restored professionally.
That's a big job.
It was a huge job, but we got a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services to pay for it, and now the map, it's pristine. It looks almost as good as the day it was printed.
Yeah, because it's a really interesting map, because it does put into perspective the route of the canal.
Yes.
And I think that these photographs are just fascinating to me. We have a photograph of they're erecting the gates on the lock.
Yes.
And this is a photo, I mean, you have to remember this was taken in 1911.
Yes.
But look at the size of that thing.
It's enormous, and you have to think that the exposure time was pretty lengthy. The photographer had to keep the shutter open a long time to capture that. And I don't know for certain.
Well, just dragging the equipment down there was another
of course.
deal.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was very heavy equipment,
Yeah.
no digital cameras, and I think some of these photographs may have been made from glass plate negatives, which are quite.
Does the museum or the library own?
We
any
have
of
some of the glass plate negatives, yeah. But they are large and unwieldy and not very portable.
Really?
And they break.
Yeah.
Yes, glass plate negatives can be quite large.
Yeah. Can you print from those? Can you?
You can, yeah. And the wonderful thing about printing from glass plate negatives is the quality of the image is so pure and so crisp. Just beautiful.
Well, and I suppose the last picture that we have to show from the collection is in 1914, and it shows a ship going through the canal.
Yes.
So, but even as so, it doesn't have, I mean, you know, they've got to keep the dredges going, I would
Yes, they
think,
do.
in there as well. So, you know, it just because they got the trench cut or the canal cut doesn't mean that it always works. It's constant, and they had to literally destroy the jungle around it.
They did.
Oh my, what a job. Can you believe that? And think of the minds of the engineers that thought of how to get that job done. Well, I guess we need to invite all these people, tell them the dates of the
The exhibition opened on April 8th, and it will remain open until December 31st. We are open to the public Monday through Friday from 9 to 5. And the second Saturday of every month from 10 until 2. And I'd also like to point out that for the duration of the summer and probably into the early fall, we have replicated on the library's front lawn a model of the Gatun Lock. And it was constructed for us by some UMKC engineering students and some high school students from the Shawnee Mission schools. And the water moves through with a solar-powered motor. So people can actually pull a lever and see the water move through the lock system, and we have little toy boats that are battery powered. You can check a boat out from the circulation desk and move your boat through the Gatun Lock.
I think that would be wonderful.
It's a lot of fun.
For children, adults, and...
Anybody wants to play with toy boats?
That's right, anybody that wants to play with toy boats.
But
and the cost of the library, I think that's important.
That's right. Well, the exhibition's free to everyone.
There you go. It costs nothing.
It costs nothing.
And think of the opportunity to see, I mean, we're talking about 100 years. You know, it's tough enough would it be to build something like that today? I mean, think what they went through to build the Hoover Dam. And that was
of course, and that was a number of years later. I think what's wonderful about this exhibition is that, one, a person does not have to be a specialist or an engineer to apprehend its importance. We tell the story in a way that it is accessible to everybody. And it really puts it on a human scale.
And that is really wonderful. I read this and I would tell it to you. Take a limitation, turn it into an opportunity. Take an opportunity and turn it into an adventure by dreaming big. And that's what they did. And that's why we have the Panama Canal. Go see the exhibit. Visit the Linda Hall Library. And Lisa Browar, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Mary.
It was a real treat. is our community.